Greetings, everyone. I'm the Hipster Snek, bringing to you a new top 10 to cover some slightly different gaming options. The analog sister to video games, tabletop RPGs. While I started my gaming career as a video gamer, I wasn't merely content to stay as such, and it didn't take long at all for me to start playing tabletop RPGs myself. And I'm far from alone. In fact, this top 10 is going to be handled a little bit differently, as my good buddy Dietaku from the Tomodachi Bros podcast will be joining me to hash out our own personal top 5 tabletop RPGs each. And this time, only 3 simple rules apply. First, this is going to be broken down by edition, as oftentimes 2 iterations of the same game can easily feel like 2 completely different gaming experiences. However, multiple slots will not be taken up by copies of the same game in its different editions. And 2, no D&D. That's way too easy, and 3.5 was the best incarnation of that anyway. Third, homebrew content that's freely available online will be counted as fully released tabletop games, since all you need to play a tabletop title is the book, some dice and some paper, and some friends. And speaking of friends, why don't you kick us off, Dietaku?
Number 5. Double Cross. Much as Snek talks about Mutants and Masterminds being his go-to game for superhero tabletop buffoonery, Double Cross is mine. Double Cross is a neat little Japanese system, which the premise is 80% of the population of the world is infected with the Renegade virus, a neat little pathogen that grants the host untold supernatural power. However, the trade-off to such an amazing ability is the fact that if one relies too much on said supernatural powers, then one will regress into a germ, a horrifying, unthinking being which is motivated only by its basest desires. How to avoid such a feat for these overds or people who actually have the virus manifest? Well, that is where the Lois and Titus system come into play, and I sincerely hope that I don't have to explain to anyone the reference there. This is actually a neat little social system whereupon one has to form bonds or connections with people in order to maintain your humanity and ensure that you don't go into insanity and germdom. This also ensures that a neat little thing whereupon even your moe blob waifu, as thick as she is and as wonderful as she is, has something that she doesn't like about you. On the flip side, your hot-blooded rival that always shows up in the nick of too late will have something they like about you as well, which is really neat and ultimately makes the system a lot more gritty and a little bit more nuanced than you probably would be led to believe, just based on the fact that the series and system are both very, very anime. But in spite of this, and if this sounds interesting at all, you can pick it up, albeit it probably will run you a pretty penny.
My choice for number 5, Log Horizon. I talked about this a little bit over on the Tomodachi Bros podcast, but Log Horizon is actually one of my favorite anime and light novel series that I've ever gotten my hands on. Not just that, but it also is its own tabletop game, which in many ways parallels aspects of both the original Elder Tales MMO, but also the mechanical effects of The Apocalypse, the isekai event that dragged the player base into the world of the game. While the fan-translated version we got is very, very heavily abridged, with more general descriptions from the translation team rather than actually what the original text conveys, the game is very much in playable state, and it relies on several key mechanics that make the game quite different from any other tabletop I've ever played. For starters, you don't maintain pools of magic points. You cast relying on cooldown times for your abilities, and a complex enmity system that can draw enemy aggro between different players. Coupled with a subclass system that allows for mechanically light role-playing in this role-playing game, you have characters that are flexible and capable in a world full of intrigue and glasses adjusting. Put all that alongside a character sheet that fits cleanly on a single-sided sheet of paper, and rules that are easy to pick up and learn, you have a user-friendly system with a simple but flexible character generation and a strong team-focused combat engine. For the sake of messing with what I do, I made a werecat guardian named Window, who loves cat puns and protecting his friends. What more can I really say apart from we're living in the database?
Number 4, Fantasy Craft. Despite what the list may lead you to believe, I am not actually against D&D at all. In fact, it's the system that I cut my teeth on in terms of role-playing. It's great. Unfortunately, the situation is that the community that surrounds it, and also the game itself to a lesser extent, just seems to hold it as a straitjacket. You have a particular type of game, and this is the only game in town, so to speak. You learn of a place, you go to place, you kill things, you collect your loot. And that's it. And that's all that the community seems to want. It's all that new players seem to want, and it's kind of saddening to me. However, if you venture outside of D&D, the D20 community actually has a bunch of different games which do allow you to do different things, and Fantasy Craft is one of these. It is very similar to D&D. It uses a lot of the same races. It uses a lot of the same terminology. However, then you start looking at things such as classes and you notice, wait a second, half the classes don't actually get involved in combat much at all. They're more about social interactions or about crafting. Things that kind of get overlooked in most D&D games. Interesting. Indeed, from artisans, explorers, and even pirates, Fantasy Craft has a very interesting gamut of classes, which promotes class versatility and diversity rather than just having a group which consists merely of Unga Bunga, I'ma hit it as hard as I can. Whoa, Unga Bunga, me too. From artisans, explorers, and even pirates who can knock people out by yelling at them very loud. Fantasy Craft has a surprising gamut of classes, which allows you to do a lot of things that you ordinarily wouldn't see in Dungeons & Dragons. From crafting to being an entrepreneur, and even just old-fashioned exploration. So, if this sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend that you give it a whirl.
My number 4, Legend of the Five Rings, 4th edition. Named for the famous book penned by the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, Legend of the Five Rings is a samurai-themed tabletop game that borrows thematic elements from samurai movies, wuxia, kung fu flicks, and just about every East Asiatic myth there is. Not just that, but you can tell some major love was poured into it, as the first leg of the book is the rather long and detailed creation myth, history, and culture of the world of Rokugan, the fictional world the game takes place in. Past that, you'll get a smooth and straightforward character creation system, largely hinged upon the 8 great clans, different families of samurai, each with an animal motif and a set of principles. My personal favorite's the Crab Clan, if you were curious. But what makes it really distinct is that the different stats fall under one of the titular 5 rings: Earth, Fire, Water, Air, and Void. And the rings themselves serve as broader stats for more general purposes, tying themes and mechanics all into one. The coolest thing, to me at least, is seeing how samurai of different houses work together to form a cohesive unit. With fast-paced and intuitive systems, battles are swift and decisive. So get yourself your 1,000 times folded Nipponichi steel blade and your Nakamura, and go be a samurai.
Number 3, Rogue Trader. I have to admit, I love me some Star Trek. Going to space, seeking out new life and new civilizations, it's all really cool. And Rogue Trader allows me to scratch this itch, all with the great power of capitalism. Set in the Warhammer 40k universe, you are a rogue trader, a person who is empowered by the Imperium to go and search out alien life forms and alien civilizations, and instead of the usual of blowing them up, you can sell them things and bring back whatever goods they have into the Empire. And most people won't kill you for it. It's all really cool. This game is absolutely phenomenal in terms of customization. You can customize your guns, you can customize the ship that you have, even down to little things like the actual origin path that brought you to be a rogue trader, which actually is a really cool way of doing a character backstory and requires people to think of a backstory, which is an unfortunate thing as a forever GM that I have to bring up, but it's neither here nor there. It's all very cool. And this is where I have to bring up the unfortunate reality that the line has been out of print for almost a decade now. So if you're like me and you actually like collecting hard copies of the books, this can run you a pretty penny. So if this does sound interesting to you at all, I would recommend that you pick up the PDFs. However, if you do find this interesting, well, there's a lot to do. Space is vast, explorer, and there is money to be made. Or the Emperor.
My number 3, Mutants and Masterminds, 2nd edition. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's an extremely crunchy RPG with tons of splatbook material for expansion and customization. To clarify, 3rd edition is fantastic, and I love it, and it does serve to simplify the 12-card pileup of a rule set that's present in 2nd, but I'm going to side with 2nd edition, specifically because it has the expansions out right now. This includes things like Ultimate Power for Cosmic Tier games, Anime Adventure for precisely what it says on the book, and Warriors and Wizards for fantasy-themed games and more. The game is easy to pick up and play, and it's difficult to master, especially when you get into things like Arrayed Powers, which to this day I've had explained to me no fewer than 3 times, and I still don't understand how that's supposed to get calculated. The point is, in a setting of superheroes and capes, you can be anything and do anything. That's the ultimate appeal. The power rank system is fairly efficient and helps give you a clearer picture of where your abilities lie spectrum-wise. The sheer customization options as broad and deep as the ocean. Want to be a flying, unstoppable Superman type? Have at it. Want to manipulate space and time and make a fortune gambling on sporting events? You can do it. Want to fly in space in a Silver Age-esque Yellow Submarine-styled surreal journey through absurdity? You can, and you should. Mutants and Masterminds, regardless of its edition, is fantastic stuff.
Number 2, Exalted 3rd Edition. Exalted. I could while away the hours singing my praises to you. If you're like me and the Tolkienian ramblings of D&D just doesn't do it for you anymore, then the East Asian-inspired Exalted, with the bureaucracy of gods, with magic superpowers chi that emanates from everything, and the supremely over-the-top antics of the Exalted may be something that you're interested in. Instead of a dime a dozen adventurer, you are an exalt, someone empowered by the celestial gods themselves to act in their stead. And after that, you are pretty much free to stomp around creation, drop-kicking behemoths and flying around and creating strange crystalline nations of narwhals, if you want to do that. I have seen any number of situations, and I have many stories, let me tell you. Great, I hear you say. Why is this number 2? Well, because unfortunately, during the crossover between 2nd and 3rd edition, they were bought out by Paradox Interactive, and a new series of developers came on. These guys are much better in terms of mechanics. I love 2nd edition in terms of its lore and fluff, but it's kind of sad when you need 3 books in order to actually play just one single given type of Exalt. You need the core book, you'll need the actual splat book for your Exalt type, and then you'll need the errata, because pretty much there are 3 or 4 different revisions to the lore or rules of your supernatural powers, especially. With 3rd edition, this is really not the case. Unfortunately, the developers also have a bad case of my way or the highway, where they produce very outlandish, well, if you don't like what we're doing, then you can take a hike, bozo. And that's unfortunate, because if they didn't do this, if they just kept their mouths quiet, if they just, advertised their work, it'd be fine. But they have to make it about them. They have to make it about, oh, we're the ones doing this, rather than, well, this is the game that we're working on. We're really proud of what we're doing, and being supportive and taking feedback. I understand as a creative person, I'm a writer myself. This is difficult, but I don't know how to tell you this, guys. You do better work if you take the feedback that you get into perspective. And unfortunately, the writers of 3rd edition Exalted do not have any plans on taking any feedback apart from the sycophants that exist on their forums. So until Paradox Interactive decides to, rein in these bozos and force them to realize, oh, maybe insulting our consumer base, especially people who have been buying our books for 10 years, isn't a good idea, I don't think I'm going to be spending any more money on Exalted. I have an entire bookshelf over there of Exalted books. I pretty much can play any session, any chronicle I want to do. So I think I'll be good.
Number 2, Final Fantasy D6 1.3 and Final Fantasy RPG 3rd edition. Yes, I'm sort of cheating by slotting 2 into one place, but I have a legit excuse, or kind of one. I actually thought these were the same game for quite some time, including part of the time wherein I was writing this very script. Heck, I literally only learned that there was an FFRPG 4th edition about 2 days before I went to record it, so you gotta work with what you have on hand. Now, I like both sets of games, but they are a bit different, with FFD6 being a bit easier to pick up and play, relying almost exclusively on a 2d6 dice pool for all major actions. Meanwhile, FFRPG tends to use different roles more frequently and is a bit more mechanically crunchy and a bit more in the way you can customize things. Though I think if you're a fan of Final Fantasy, you'd enjoy either, and which one you prefer over the other will boil down to what sort of tabletop RPGs you find the most engaging. They ultimately follow a similar format, selecting your race, your class, and your overall role in the party, but having the freedom of the story being whatever it is you want it to be. The calculations in each are straightforward, and level-ups happen in swift, simple formats. If you're curious as to what I made, it's a pretty similar combination to my Final Fantasy XIV character as a Viera Dragoon. But regardless of what you choose to build, I think you'll enjoy this game if you have any love of Final Fantasy in you at all.
And lastly, this leads us to number 1, Dungeons the Dragoning. This may require a bit of explanation. You see, once upon a time, not too long ago, I was quite the frequent visitor of a certain Chinese cartoon appreciation board site. There, I was perusing the traditional games board when I noticed a call for a brand new homebrew tabletop RPG. Looking at the date, realizing it was April 1st, I realized that this was most likely going to be a ruse. I was going to open up the PDF and it was going to be a scan of some Toho Project Dojinshi smut. What the heck, I thought. Hey, maybe the smut will be good. I downloaded the PDF and looked at it and realized something quite wondrous. I had been double fooled. It wasn't smut. It was quite possibly the best game I had ever put my eyes on. The entire game is tongue-in-cheek, with systems and lore that is just straight up lifted from other series and from other tabletop games. Basically all fiction and even some non-fiction is fodder for this. And the racial and class options are absolutely insane, where you can become a triple dragon, or a dragon blood dragonborn of Bahamut, or even really silly things like a werewolf maid dedicated to the chaos gods. It's all very silly and very much, see what we did there? That I can appreciate. And on top of being a forever GM, this basically allows me to throw any insane idea that I have at my players. And thanks to the everything is fair game mentality of the system, there's no, well, you can't do that because of the lore, that'll butt up against it. It's all very silly once again, and I just love that. If I had one beef with the system, I honestly have never been able to play it. I have tried time and again, but things always get in the way, and it just really bums me out because this is perhaps the one holy grail that I have in all of tabletop gaming, and I've never been able to do it. It's not that I don't have friends who don't want to play it. It's just whenever we actually sit down and try and set something up, real life or something else always gets in the way. It's a shame. However, the game is absolutely free, So if this sounds interesting at all, check it out. You literally are losing nothing apart from the time to look it over.
Next up, some honorable mentions. Call of Cthulhu. It's a good game with intuitive mechanics. You can make a good character in less than 15 minutes, but it requires a good GM with the right attitude, and it does tend to get bogged down under some of the goofier elements of Lovecraft's mythos. Secondly, I'm not a big fan of sanity meters since different people handle different stresses different ways, and the game doesn't really go about reflecting that well. Old World of Darkness. As I mentioned before, Old World of Darkness is a fun, if slightly dumb, experience with a series of different books that are all compatible with one another. Mixed parties are a sight to see, and the rapid escalation of threat will keep the party always on their toes. Don't play New World of Darkness, it sucks. Horai High. It isn't translated yet, but I look forward to that day with bated breath. And finally, my number one pick, Shadowrun 6th World. Take the boring, real world, give it to a group of hardcore history buffs, pepper it with some cyberpunk and fantasy elements all at the same time, and load it up with guns, and more guns, and that's the recipe for how you get Shadowrun. I confess I've already gushed about this game before, but now's the chance to talk more about how exactly I got into the tabletop side of things. I started with 5th edition when I finally put pencil to paper and began runs of my own. And while I loved 5th and the sheer volume of splats that came with it, there came times that, as the GM in particular, the system ended up vexing me, mostly by way of being overly specific and pedantic with its rules. You want a good, quick example of that? Look up how 5th edition handles demolishing a building. But lo, as if my thoughts were remotely plucked from my head and used as example, 6th World came down atop us like a Thor shot to the skull as the newest iteration of the book greatly simplifies and streamlines rules that 4th and 5th editions had allowed to get cluttered. While the system is still aggressively fast-paced with a dynamic initiative system and a punishing damage track system, many core elements of the game were designed to reduce redundant rolling and expedite exhilarating exhibitions of execution. You want to be a magic ninja? Do it. You want to tank it up and be a cyborg? That's easily done. Be a huge nerd and play on the internet all day? Just gonna put that one down as a double check, I guess, but Shadowrun's classless building allows for characters to develop as the game goes on and grow ever stronger to meet even crazier expectations. In fact, not to tilt my hands too much, but definitely keep an eye over on the Tomodachi Bros YouTube channel if I get your attention. We might be starting a certain something that you might want to stay up to date with if this has piqued your interest at all. Hint, hint. To give one of those cards away, yours truly will be the humble GM of the evening. And that brings us to the conclusion of our top 10 tabletop titles. Did you guys at home learn about something you've never gotten to play before? Anything you're dying to play now that you've learned about it? Then we did our job. So a very special thanks to my ever-ready party member Dietaku for joining us here on the breakdown.
So, thank you very much to Mr. Hipster Snek for having me. This is Dietaku.
And thank you, dear viewers, for watching. If you liked today's episode, be sure to tap the like button so we know we did our job properly. For more like this each week, there's always that subscribe and bell icon too. Leave us a comment below telling us what your favorite first or foremost tabletop RPGs are, and maybe share with us some stories from your time with them. For more from Dietaku and myself, be sure to stop by the Tomodachi Bros Podbean and YouTube mirror, and our ever-expanding plethora of social media, all links available in the description as always. Thanks again for joining us here, and I hope you continue to do so each week, with more obscure reviews, indie excellence, and more on the way. And I will see you there.